Otherwise, cool. All right, so for everyone that's new, welcome. Everyone that's returning, also welcome. For everyone's information, you are here because you wanted to be at the CF on K8s Working Group Forum meeting. So that's why we're here to sort of discuss all the various topics in the Cloud Foundry on Kubernetes space. So there is a attached document on the meeting. And so if you have anything you want to add on there for topics, we can do that. Otherwise, I have two small ones that we can talk about initially, and then we can just sort of field ad hoc as we go from there. So the two initial topics I'd like to bring up are one, a new CF for K8s release was cut. I know this is sort of a topic that Roland was here to talk about, sort of like what is going on with that project. So that was primarily an update to address some compatibility and security. So to make sure it's on recent versions of Istio, make sure it can use the new build packs, make sure it supports the new Kubernetes 1.22 and hopefully also 1.23 whenever that is going to be released. So that's sort of a maintenance mode release, but to try to keep the platform still stable for those of you that are using it. So we can talk about that a bit if anyone wants to talk about it further right now. And then I have a second topic that relates to the other nascent projects spinning off. So let's just talk about that one now if anyone has any comments or questions about that.
So maybe just because I wrote this question in the chat, in the Slack chat. Hi everyone, I'm very pleased and I'm very honored to be in this crowd. I actually know and work with Cloud Foundry since a couple of years. I was at Swisscom, was a developer advocate around the Swisscom application cloud and this stuff. When the whole Cloud Foundry as a service stuff started to fall down, I was always looking for where do I consume my Cloud Foundry, and which brought me then to Kubernetes. And of course, then I figured out the CF for K8s project and started to use that. So at the moment, I indeed have one on Google Cloud running, but for me, it's just if I could find somewhere a service where I don't have to bother with Kubernetes, Cloud Foundry, and everything, I would do it immediately. So I'm really a dev that is using these stuff and loves containerization on a development layer, and therefore I'm happy that it's still there. Things are around, and whatever will be the way that the community will go, I will try to follow and make the best out of it. I hope this makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. You kind of want to be abstracted away from all the bits below it, and that's obviously what we'd love to be doing. You can never get completely away from it, right? Because of like the various topographies you have of your IaaS. But yeah, that's actually kind of leads somewhat into the second part of it, as long as no one else wants to comment specifically about the CF for K8s release. All right, then the other bit.
My thank you, right? Really, Andrew, thank you very much for the release.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we got to keep it running, but just want to set expectations that there's no active feature development. This is pretty much, we want to make sure that the platform still works for you, but just temper your expectations if you want like a full set of new features coming out.
And it's only showcases on my platform, so you don't break any new Facebooks or whatever, so no problem.
Cool. Yeah, so additionally, I had mentioned the CF K8s controllers and CF K8s API repos that were set up, and that is sort of aims to be a transparent compatibility layer over top of Kubernetes. So Kubernetes native constructs with custom resources that then has a Cloud Foundry API layer that sort of talks to that, but eschewing the traditional components from Cloud Foundry underneath. So sort of like re-envisioning the experience on Kubernetes, but not actually carrying over the code bases from before. So conceptually somewhat similar on the like user-facing side, but underneath the underpinnings are quite different. And so those were two repos that we had split out. So we had the Kubernetes part of it and then the API part of it. And we had envisioned keeping them separate so that you could sort of like piecemeal apply them. We found that's been a little bit tricky to manage the dependencies between them. So as of essentially end of last week and yesterday, we actually merged the two repositories together. So now you can find everything in the K8s controllers repo. So you'll be able to clone that down. There are two subdirectories in there for the two different major components in there. So just in case you were watching the K8s API repo and notice that it's not being committed to anymore going forward, it's because it's been moved over. We need to put a notice on the K8s API repo that that code has been merged over. We did maintain the history, so you can still track the file changes, even though it's been subtreed into the other repo. But everything is now located in one repo. Should make it a little bit easier to provide sort of like easy setup and track the changes between the two different pieces. So that's sort of the high level notices. And so I'm going to sort of open the floor to anyone that wants to bring anything up in the space. So feel free to speak up.
I have a suggestion to talk about uniqueness in terms of Kubernetes and to reconsider our decision to use GUIDs for Kubernetes object names and use user-provided names as labels. So the big problem that we have is that Kubernetes is with eventual consistency by definition, meaning that the only ways to synchronize and guarantee that objects do not are not created twice or more times is their names. This is the only guarantee that Kubernetes provides you. And now that we're using some random generated GUIDs and user-provided names for labels, we do that for the main purpose that we want to be able to rename those objects. Changing the values of labels is easy in Kubernetes, but changing the names of Kubernetes objects is not possible. You basically have to delete the old object and create a new one with the name you want. Now, there are lots of problems that with this eventual consistency, you can't guarantee that, for example, you would not end up with an application having the same name. And last week, me and my European colleagues were working on approaches on how to solve this and how to make this guarantee. And we came up with a working implementation that we create a, so to say, proxy object, which has the name that the same name as the user provided name, so that this is a projection of the original object having the name with the user provided name. But then the big drawback of this thing is that this proxy object has to live as long as the real object lives, so that we can synchronize by it. And it is quite awkward that for every object that we want to create and we want to guarantee uniqueness, we also have to create such a delegate. Which means that for every application, every role binding, every whatever the user can create space or whatever, we have to have this duplicate. So we were thinking, can we not reconsider this decision, and instead of using GUIDs for object names, just use the names that the user provides and treat those objects. So when you create an application, you have a chain of objects being created, for example, package, droplet, build pack, whatever. So can we not say that the relationship between those objects is by, for example, a certain level selector, similar to what deployment and pods relationship is, so that whenever you want to rename an object, you just create the new object with the same label selector and remove the old one, which means that the object you create is nothing more than a label over the underlying chain of objects. Similarly, you can think about it as we have hard links on the Linux operating system. I mean, the file system. You have a chunk of data and bunch of names, which are your hard links, but they reference one and the same thing. So I know that there are going to be quite a lot of challenges to implement it. Maybe there's going to be quite a lot of problem, but this would save us all the pain around those synchronization and locking in Kubernetes. So I think that we created a proposal about it, but just wanted to bring it up here to see what other people think. I personally am not convinced whether the use case of renaming stuff is that important, and is it worth talking about not supporting it with Kubernetes? I don't know whether that's also an option.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if we have any metrics about how much people actually rename applications. We're trying to stick, as closely as we can to supporting as much of the API as we can. So that was kind of why we settled on that. I do think what you're talking about is interesting. So I would actually be curious to see your proposal and maybe a little more concrete example. But I'd like to hear other members of the community and team what they think as an initial impression. I think there are a few of you out there. Maybe Dave or Akira. Oh, I might be stepping away from coffee. Oh, no,
yeah, sorry,
Dave.
I'm just getting my my breakfast together here. I think the challenge with applications specifically is that renaming applications is a strategy for zero downtime upgrades. That you have application A, you push a new version of it as application B, and then remap your routes, but then ultimately you want the application to be called application A. So then once you've remapped everything and confirmed everything's working, you'll delete the old application A and then rename application B to application A so that you're back into your steady state of the application just running and serving requests. And so that rename strategy is important as part of that process.
I kind of understand this, but isn't that the way Cloud Foundry implements zero downtime? I mean, Cloud Foundry on Bosch. Kubernetes has other means to implement this zero downtime. For example, when you push a new version of your deployment, then your prods are gradually rolled out so that the new version kicks in. There is no need to, create a new deployment, then do all the renaming dance. You just push a new version. That's it.
Yeah, I think the challenges, well, there's a couple of challenges I think we're going to face there. One is probably that people are going to have a lot of tooling around how they push applications today. And if they're looking to migrate over from running on top of Bosch to running on top of Kubernetes, then they're going to have to rework all of that tooling. And also, if they don't want to if they want to try out the new application, do like an A/B testing scenario, they'll want both versions of the application up and running at the same time, and they'll want the ability to then control traffic flow between the two applications. So maybe they'll start by saying, 10% of the traffic goes to the new app, and then they can slowly ramp that up until they get to 100%. It's giving them more confidence that everything's working. It won't be a full 0 to 100% cutover from one app to one version of the app to the next. So I don't know. I know it will work for a certain set of customers. I'm just not sure, of users. It just won't work for everybody.
I see.
I think that the A/B testing scenario will be covered by another native K8s means, but the concern about existing tooling remains, I guess. I've seen can't recall what object, but I think there is some Kubernetes object that can control what percent of the traffic goes where. But the tooling still remains.
Yeah, I think my concern from a developer experience perspective would be if we're going to end up doing something that would prevent us from supporting that renaming, like app renaming specifically in the future, because we have seen people use it for a long time in in their existing CI scripts to do that kind of switching back and forth. So even if we don't need to support it right now, if we have a way of getting there as we look to support that full developer interface within the space, that seems important to me.
Yeah, there's also the concern of in Cloud Foundry on VMs, you are dealing with unique names essentially, whereas in Kubernetes, it's only like a namespace name that is unique. So you need to be pretty careful about those boundaries where you could have the same name application in different namespaces. And so I'm sure it's workable, but that's just some of the concern, which is where we led to the GUID situation is, okay, if we can make something that's essentially globally unique and put in some webhooks to sort of validate that sort of scenario, then it simplified the world a little bit for us. It sounds like it creates some pain in other areas, which is unfortunate, but yeah, like I said, I'd still like to kind of see more concretely what it is, if it's not too much work to sort of put to paper, because obviously now is the time to bring these concerns up and decide what kinds of trade-offs we can make.
Yeah, the problem with the approach that we currently have is that there is no uniqueness guarantee, and you can quite easily end up with two spaces, for example, with the same name, which is going to be quite a massive pain because solving that manually would still be hard.
Yeah, the spaces are an interesting one because that is a non-namespace resource, right? So like your pods, your daemon sets, whatever, those are all namespace, but the namespaces themselves are not namespace. They're cluster scoped. So that is definitely.
You can think about
Mm-hmm.
you can think about spaces that they're namespaced within the org. Org is sort of namespace.
Yeah, from a Cloud Foundry concept, they are. From the Kubernetes perspective, namespaces are a cluster scoped object, which is, yeah, that sort of highlights your concern of you can have two different spaces that sort of represent the same thing, unfortunately. So that's one definitely to talk more a bit about after some more thinking, at least on my part. I need to think about that some more. Let's see. Just catching up on chat. Okay, cool. Thanks, Eric, for linking the document. The proposal used CF objects as object names as K8s names. It's in the Zoom chat if anyone wants to take a look at it. I'm not sure how we can get this into the recording. I can drop it in the notes, which might be helpful. Cool. We can continue talking about this more, or if there are any other topics people want to bring up, feel free to do so. Questions, comments, concerns?
I just want to double check that that link is the right link. I think there was another one that was floating around using leases. I don't know, Danny, if you can take a look at that and validate that link, the one you're talking about.
I think these two proposals are pretty much different strategies of solving the same thing.
Yeah.
So one is using leases, the other is using our own object, which is like a label object, not label object, but yeah, a name object.
Yeah, the link that Eric provided is about using user-provided names as Kubernetes object names. I can also post the other link about using those leases object to guarantee consistency.
It's actually on the on that GitHub project where we now should be tracking our proposals. I'm pasting the link in the chat. It's in the to do or whatever the column name is for review column. So both can be found there.
Perfect. I'll drop that in the document as well. Thank you kindly. Cool.
So I guess it would be nice if some of you write some of these things that we discussed in the comments anyway, the two proposals where they make sense so that the discussion can continue in the documents, I think.
Absolutely. And I'd like to especially back that since people are in various time zones. So we need to make sure that we have communication lines open between everyone. I do love the in-person discussion, but or for everyone to be able to participate and sort of keep up to date, we need to make sure that people can actually view everything. So. All right. Any other topics people want to bring up today? Sounds like we're good to go on that.
I wanted to bring up something, but it was more for like the other thing, which is not the SIG call, but since there are other topics, I'll bring it up today. This is, we kind of decided that we want a concourse instance for proper CI because GitHub Actions weren't always adequate. And I have an action item to write a chore for this, but I realized that I don't really know where we're going to deploy that, like in what GK project and where we're going to push the images. So I don't think it's a good idea because like we're pretty much the Irini people plus the Reliant people and we have two projects already, but it sounds wrong to me to be using those, you know, those organizations. So do you think we should have new ones for CF1K specifically? What should we call them? I asked Chris already, he said that this can be done, but I guess we need to decide on the names or if we want to do that. Like a GK
Naming.
project, Docker Hub project. I guess you can also write in Slack, but yeah, have to create those.
Yeah, I think if it doesn't end up being a huge amount of effort, we should probably try to create new projects for these things just to sort of keep them separate rather than bundling them in with some of the old stuff, just to keep better separation. I think we can find a concourse instance. We can either run our own, or I think there's one that's hosted somewhere that we could jump on. And so that shouldn't be too much of an issue. The GitHub projects are pretty easy to create. We'll need to decide, like you said, whether that CI stuff should be in the CF8s controllers, or if we want to have a separate repo for it. Having just had all that fun separate repo stuff, that'll be a fun discussion. And then the Docker Hub repositories are pretty simple to create. So that's like the least consequential part of the issue.
We already have this on Docker Hub. We have Cloud Foundry already, so maybe we can just reuse that if we have access to those credentials. I don't think our team, the European part of the team, has, but I guess this can be dealt with. So Docker Hub Cloud Foundry is probably a good one. We can have controllers, API, whatever there, but I didn't quite get where we should spin up the concourse. You're talking about some existing instance, or?
Yeah, I think we'd probably want to create a new one. I'm trying to remember if there's a hosted one that Cloud Foundry has or not. There might be, there might not be. Even if there is, there are trade-offs there. So we might have to spin up a new one. Eric, do you know?
I've just heard that there is some sort of common concourse instance that I think the Bosch folks have been using for some things, but I don't have a lot of detailed context on it.
Yeah, so we might want to start with the assumption that we'll host our own. and then poke around to see if there's one that is suitable for our purposes. But again, it's something that we've done in the past, so I'm not too worried about it.
So it sounds like we need a new GKE or whatever project for CF1Ks that's called CF1Ks, for example. And that if we have this, I guess we have everything.
Yeah, that's
Cool.
what
All
I
right.
think is the right move.
Cool.
But
Thanks.
again, I'm more than willing to be wrong on this. Please, everyone weigh in. We should just definitely start a thread on that on Slack to sort of track what we need, what resources we need. That will, go into a chore, but also just to keep visibility up for everyone. So awesome. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, I'll post on Slack so that we can have a thread there.
Cool. Well, again, floor is open for anything. If not, then we can probably end a little bit early and let some of our European counterparts get off to dinner or sleep or whatever is the appropriate activity at the time of day where you are located. So cool. Thank you all so much for coming and bringing up these topics. There's a bunch of good stuff that's going to be discussed over the next, days and weeks. And we'll try to keep all of that context in text so that people can follow along and weigh in. And again, thanks for coming. Thanks for sharing your thoughts.